I have been in a very good energy space, making myself useful in many, many different ways. And looking forward to our conversation. Very flexible and open to whatever emerges. So completely happy to play with what emerges. Nice energy. Good to see you both. That's where I am.
Great. Great.
Yeah, well, I'll go next. Yeah, I'm doing good. Really enjoying the weather here. It's really nice to feel the warmth of the sun after many months of cold. I'm really looking forward to I really look forward to these conversations because they mean a lot to me. Yeah, I was thinking that perhaps we could obviously talk about we have already spoken a bit about the colonial history that we both share, and in a sense, but I thought also, I mean, that I think is really would be great to continue with that, and also something to do with sort of what emerges from that is part of it. I think what emerges from that, and also kind of what we're looking at in terms of our own cultural predicament and in our own situations, and what kind of things we're reflecting about and how they might relate to more of a sort of intercultural dialogue.
Great. Okay, well, I'll go next. Yeah, I'm also really, this is great. I'm glad it wasn't too long a gap. It's great to come back together. And I'm also looking forward to it. I'm good. I've just ending this kind of retreat time, really, but it's been, in terms of writing, it's more a writing retreat. It's been really productive, and still got a long way to go, but it's just, I've so much appreciated having the time to really meditate, go deeply, and think about, just think about things, so particularly things I'm writing about. So that's like a precious, precious space. And just like Mumbai, London is really busy. We're really busy. We're very involved in a lot of things, which is great. But it also is great to have this time alone. And completely, I'm just out in the country. There's not even a village nearby. And I've just, it's been very good. So, and it's also made me reflect, part of my reflection, whatever I'm writing about, it's very interesting. Part of it always tends to end up looking at cross-cultural ontologies and different ways of thinking about things. And it just seems to enter into whatever I'm doing. So this is great. I'm really glad that we're having the time together.
3 are done, so I'm the only one left, I guess. Somehow it reminds me of one of the scary nursery rhymes, one of those Agatha Christie novels. I'm the only one left. I always have like 111 going off. I'm feeling good about the conversation that's coming up. Quite excited. I was sad we missed it last week because it sets a continuation. The break becomes quite a bit. So that, and I'm just feeling hot, and when I'm hot, I'm a little irritable.
Yeah. Don't blame you. We are far from that problem of being irritable from the heat. we can be irritable for other reasons.
I know. Abhishek and my daughter Ananya have to always take care. They have to tread softly around me.
Right. Great. Good. Wow. All right. So. So, I was thinking since our last call, Abhishek, you had your experience, you talked about it before we came on, or during our last call, but you were going to you presented, I think, since then at I've spoken to Elizabeth, actually, she mentioned it, yeah, the Integral Conference. And anyway, I was just curious if any thoughts came out of that in relation to what we're talking, or not. Maybe not at all, but I thought maybe that'd be somewhere to start because it just happened.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm sensing, at least in these circles, a much greater receptivity to this conversation. So I certainly felt like it's interesting the timing of our conversation and a deeper trend of openness to considering other worldviews is happening. And I say that for a couple of things. I think the way I was received was different. The IEC, I think, felt more heard, welcomed, considered. Also dialogue with people around some of these cultural worldviews and so on. So I think that was good. The highlights for me were, I mean, Charles Eisenstein spoke, and he spoke about how wanting a totalitarian narrative itself is such a colonial idea, wanting one size fits all, and therefore kind of looked at the integral attempt and said, are we trying to do the same thing, trying to explain all of the world with one word? So he did it very delicately, but very, very beautifully.
Nice. That's
very
good to hear.
good. Yeah.
That was well done. Susan Cook-Greuter, who's also an elder in the space, she came up with, her paper was on weird plus diversity. Weird is white, industrialized, rich, educated Democrats, I think, or something of that sort. Weird is a thing of how weird has hijacked the integral space.
Interesting.
And, how it removes diversity. And she had presented in the Integral Conference in Africa. I figured that last year, 2019, I think there was an Integral African Conference where she was the only white presenter. And she presented about, valuing other cultures and having some humility. So that was also quite present. And there was willingness to dialogue as well as curiosity about what really is our worldview about. And I could share a little bit, I can share in the text what I had written out on Facebook as well. The starting point of that really coming from the fact that our culture grew in a different set of conditions, which were of abundance and which were of much extended time frames, and that changes a lot. So not to claim credit or be proud of it, because in a way it's a geographical happening. Just as I feel it's a geographical happening that in Europe the countries were of a similar size and next to each other, so they very quickly moved up the industrial age because of that close, like Jared Diamond and so on. So I think this is also some degree of geography and history which makes it that way. But what does that do to the worldview?
Yes.
How do you conceive life differently when there is abundance, and when there is that kind of diversity, and therefore the polytheistic thought. I also recorded some dialogues with an elder here, Raghu Ananthanarayana, who spent a lot of time studying yoga and Indic ideas. And I have about 5-6 hours of footage with him now recorded around decolonization, reclaiming the Indian mind, and we're going to be doing dialogues on decolonization also.
Great.
Wow. That sounds
using
fantastic.
these videos, using these videos as a reference, and then doing dialogues around that. So
Are these YouTube video? Are they on YouTube?
Yeah, they're unlisted, but I could share them with you.
That'd be great.
In fact,
Love
if I
to see
can
them.
make space, if I can make space in the decolonization dialogue, in case you'd like to listen in, that would be amazing also, because it'd be a very rich dialogue that you could, I mean, I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but just opened up right now that if you could listen into that dialogue, that will be very rich.
I'd love to hear. Yeah.
So let's see. So so a lot has been happening actually on this front, if you ask me.
Yes.
Over the last few weeks, a lot. So we are in touch, I think, with a deeper undercurrent of this. Like what we are sensing is not just a local signal, but I think there is something in the zeitgeist, in the air, in the time. And we are one such node.
Very interesting.
That's quite fascinating because, I think it was 2018, I think, or maybe even, no, actually it was earlier than that. I think it was probably 2016 or something. My friend Shri, I don't know if you know him, you might not know him, but he's an Indian friend of mine who lives in Hyderabad, but he was somebody who was also involved with Andrew for many years. And he and I actually gave a presentation at the Integral, it was the first European Integral conference. And we gave this presentation on whether it was in the form of a question, which was, is integral really truly integral, Nice. And it very much revolved around the fact that, Eastern forms of thinking, did not seem to be really included other than in sort of Ken Wilber's sort of translation of them, as it were. It's just really interesting to hear, that there's obviously been quite a shift, because at that time, it definitely was very different from how you just described it now. And so that's really, really good to hear that progression is happening. I mean, like what you were saying about the Charles Eisenstein talk, it's really interesting. And Abhi, one thing I wanted to ask you, this thing about abundance that you mentioned, I think is a really fascinating thing. And I mean, is that something that you brought up in the conference, or is that was just something that you have been thinking about? Because it strikes me as that's a very interesting perspective. I mean, that I don't think is often talked about, I think it's probably has a lot of truth to it. And this relationship, the relationship between abundance and worldview, what is that relationship and how does that work? I think it's a really interesting question, actually.
So I did not get a chance to present it with my paper. Present it with what I was presenting in the conference, but later in the closed group of the conference, I typed out some text. Let me see if I can put it out. It was just as a reference. But yeah, so that was more in that. So you can keep sharing. I'll just pull it out. Yeah. So it was in that context that I. Yeah.
That's kind of fascinating, the relationship between geographical. I mean, obviously there is a real very clear geographical reality to that. And then you think about, well, yes, but what would be the psychological or whatever, I don't know whether psychological is right, whether sort of being, how would that affect your being in a way, in that, and as opposed to the Western world where there was clearly a sense of lack.
Right.
Which obviously, connects with the whole idea of colonialism and
also, also rivalry. I think it's not that rivalry doesn't occur in the global South, but it's very strong, and it's very, it goes along with the, I think a sort of epistemology of separation and. That sense of scarcity is that you're always competing with someone, which is a very Western, to me, very Western concept, this sort of, yeah. So anyway, I'm curious what you came from that, because I think it pervades a lot of Western thought and Western culture. Really can be traced back to that. As long with our secular as well, we don't have a felt sense in Western culture of a sort of absolute dimension, so to speak. We don't really have that, which is a unifying ground, can be, is the ultimate unifying ground. But that thing of scarcity, because I was thinking that even in right now, the West particularly, there's very little capacity for assimilation culturally, I feel. It's like the spiritualism versus the activist, and I'm actually been focusing on gender recently, and there's just so much sub-rivalry within even that one topic, right? And right now, even within the gay community or the trans community, the gay community is turning against the trans. I mean, it is unbelievable. The more fragmented we get, there's usually, instead of being able to conceive of all this as a broad tent where there's room for everyone, and actually more than room, we could actually support each other, it tends to fragment, and in that fragmentation be rivalrous. And I'm curious about this idea of scarcity, whether deeply that's what we're always doing. Someone else immediately sort of imposes a threat, even though there doesn't really make sense, really. That's
Yeah,
very,
so there's quite a survival,
Yeah.
the survival orientation there. Because also I'm thinking in India, the relationship between abundance and, the capacity for diversity, because India is such one of the amazing things. I mean, when you're used to being in the West, in India is this kind of natural capacity to make room for others,
genuinely.
genuinely, and other forms of thinking and so forth. So it's just fascinating. I hadn't really thought very much about this abundance question before, abundance scarcity question, but it's really, I think there's quite a lot in it actually.
My thoughts, which we've also discussed, just the area that you come from, and even what sort of language forms in that area has been fascinating to me. For example, the German language, and then how that changes thought, and the languages like that, or Chinese. I always wondered, how does language develop in a particular area, and then forever changes thought? Because some of the West's greatest philosophers, educationists, came from that Germanic, Austrian sort of background, and Chinese thought. I mean, other than like filial respect and responsibility, and considering parents as gods, which is very Chinese and very Indian, and those kind of similarities. Other than that, I don't know how many similarities there are between China and India. I don't know. And then Russia, of course, is a whole different ball game. And when we start moving a little westward, ahead of Pakistan and all, there also it's different. So that, area abundance, but then language also.
Yeah.
Language. Something came from the earth or from that area that made people start talking that way.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's interesting.
I feel it.
Can you say more about that, Suruchi? I'm just curious.
I have a very non-scientific kind of cuckoo explanation of it, because once when I was in a deep sort of trance-like state, it happened to me a few times in a meditative thing. So I was in this sort of vortex, and my strange languages started pouring out of me. This happened for like a year or two.
Wow.
Yes, so it was, and then somehow my body would, my spirit would move to some other part of the world, and either some Arabic sounding things would start pouring out, or some Chinese sort of things would start pouring out, or it would become a lot of clicks and hisses.
Wow, how amazing.
So what do you make of that? I mean,
then when I sat with it, I was like, this has definitely got to do with the geography of the place.
Okay. Interesting.
And did you have a sense, Suruchi, that of where different languages, the different sounds would come from or not? Or did you later just think, oh, that sounded like Chinese? Or were, at the time, did you have a felt sense that this is...
In between, I had a felt sense.
You did?
Suddenly, yes, I did. And I had some things I managed to record, but then they were my old phone, so I lost all the recordings. Because I could manage to continue to speak that way, even when I came out of it. Like I could speak quite clearly in that.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Today only also, incidentally, I read about Sanskrit having 12 words for happiness.
Amazing.
Happiness.
Yeah.
And them trying to do these videos where they showed it to English speakers and to native Indian speakers, and just to express that, you are able to express it in a fewer words, right? If your language has access to that. You don't have to go convoluted to talk about the happiness that comes from the shyness of seeing a beloved, but you can just use a simple word. So I think definitely happiness. I read today. I was reading this book called The Science of Happiness by Klein, some Stephen Klein, and that's where I picked up Sanskrit as.
So in that respect, I'm wondering what you feel happens when you speak English. I mean, because if you're kind of like civilizational kind of thought process and ways of imagining things is coming from, or probably from the root of Sanskrit through Hindi or whatever, and what happen? What do you feel something happens when you speak English in relationship to that? And
because quite convoluted. It's like clipped.
Reduction. We find it reducing. Reductionist and objective.
I can imagine.
And objectifying, like objective.
Okay. There we go. Yeah.
There's a sense of objectivity. Yeah, there is some objectification built into it, I guess. Something like that.
Wow.
That's really interesting that you said that, because when I mean many years ago I studied Sanskrit, but when I went to India and I was I studied Hindi, but I was learning it too. For one of the first things that struck me was the different way, and this, I don't know, this is what you're talking about, Abhi and Suruchi, but even saying, I am happy. It's not I am happy. It was like happiness, lagna, happiness is arising in me, or happiness. It was very different. It didn't have that. I noticed that when I was a young person. I thought, wow, that's very interesting. It doesn't have that, sort of insertion of the I and then everything else.
Yeah. I think that much is pretty clear. The I is quite dabowed, as we say. What is that? Suppressed.
Yeah.
But suppressed is a sort of negative.
Salient. No, not salient. The opposite. It's in the background.
Yeah. Well, to me, it was like non-separation, though. It's almost like not.
But
separate.
also, I just wanted to make another point about you feel that this whole colonization thing is in the air, because even when you're on Clubhouse or on Instagram, and I follow a lot of Dalit handles.
A lot of what? Dalit.
Caste,
lower caste. And,
I know. Yeah.
So they are also very vocal now, violently so, in their speech and in throwing off their colonization.
Right.
And they don't care about the British or anything. They just want to throw off the colonization of Hinduism.
Right.
Upper caste Hindus.
Yeah.
Sorry, the colonization of what with Hinduism? What?
Upper caste.
Oh, okay.
Upper caste Hindus.
Upper caste Hindus. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
They couldn't be bothered about.
So that's what they're really speaking about. Yeah.
Yes.
Responding to. Got it. Yeah.
They are.
Right.
I mean, they're angry. They're very angry.
Right.
So,
right.
And rightly so.
Right.
So, for me, I understand what India is in the past, and it was amazing, but also it had it's the shadow side of it, like where they managed to deep rivets in their own people.
Yeah.
And maybe because in those subcultures, then they managed to bloom, but maybe they managed to take out the negative aspects or the hatred or the divisiveness on the lower castes.
Yeah.
Some way. So then they need not take it out on others or like people who came in from outside.
Interesting.
I don't know. What's going on. So even because the Dalits, they looked different, so many of them, and their place in society, and they're really questioning everything, like even in Bollywood representation, they're shown the way they look, just like the Aborigines would look or tribals would look, and you never cast them in the big main roles or anything. So how will they feel part of the culture or feel good? There's nothing for them to feel good about.
Right. Understandable. Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's also colonization,
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because just thinking a little bit about that. Suruchi? Because it seems like that tendency in the human psyche to dominate others can be found everywhere. Actually, you know, it does seem like that, right? That's
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Somehow you can be that way and still produce great philosophy and literature and beauty. Like the Brahmins or the other castes would do that. The Germans or the British, you know, they could be awful on this side, but just be doing amazing things.
That's right. Yeah.
Sorry, excuse me. I actually have to go to the door. Somebody's. I'm sorry really sorry about this. I'll be right back.
Not at all. She's so forward.
Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I think that's I think this is really, really important because it's very easy to, to romanticize, you know, and yet at the same time, not lose sight of civilizational differences, you know, that, because I wonder too, I've been aware of this in India just because I've been there so long, and you know, there's always been this also low caste Hindus and untouchables, and you know, the Dalits and Muslim Dalits, etc. But I wondered if that was something that, because it is so much part of human nature, you could say it's like built in, this tendency to dominate, but whether in India that, I don't know, whether that was just, you know, you were just saying, Suruchi, I just want to try and think this through, is that you can have these amazing civilizational philosophies that are born, not just intellectual, but are born out of the being of a culture, right? They're very, you know, they're very holistic, they're very refined, they're beautiful, and yet they can end up being corrupted by their own people expressing it, because those often, I wondered this about India, because of its Dharma is, I mean, you said about Sanskrit, Abhi, I mean, it is so, I mean, it's a fair way back now, but I did study the Upanishads and things like that, and I always was like mind blown by the precision and the fluidity of the Dharma, right? It's whole, and yet it came out, I wonder, it came out of men, you know, human beings, men and women who were enlightened human beings and could see this realization in terms of culture, in terms of how it could be and what it would take. But actually human beings, because we're sort of, in a way, we're not enlightened, whether the cultures themselves ended up. And I'm wondering this in India too, where this sort of the caste system, because I've read, whether it's true or not, that originally it was actually far more functionally based, right? Artisanal, it didn't have this diminishing of people. It did always have a serf caste. I mean, it sounds like Sudra, but I'm wondering if that came because it was a corruption of just the nature that very few civilizations, the actual populations, can articulate or live the deepest truths or realizations of their culture. I don't know, if that's, kind of.
I would say that in India, access to, while the Brahmins, the upper caste, claimed access to knowledge and access to God and so on, there are centuries where the biggest saints did not come from that class.
Right.
They actually came from a different class, and they really broke through different movements like the devotion, the bhakti movement, and all those. Not a Brahminical thing, but really like saying that it's accessible to everyone. For example, Hinduism also has kept trying to upgrade itself and revive itself in several waves. Each time trying to assimilate and justify. Also, you could argue like justify the caste system. Each time trying to reinvent, regenerate itself also. And therefore, like broadly, access to the divine then no longer was a monopoly of Brahmins. I think that became more democratized with Kabir and Tukaram and all.
Yes, because the the Bhakti movement was actually, it's very ancient. I mean, it started, you know, I think in, I don't know, the 12th century or even earlier. So it's, and it was a completely kind of low caste kind of movement, you know, and it had so much sort of, there was, I mean, so many incredible individuals came out of that movement, and so it's fascinating. And from what I understand, I mean, from what I've studied about it, I mean, it seemed like, again, it wasn't uniform. You know, there was nothing uniform about this. In other words, in some states, some parts of India functioned in very different ways from other parts. It wasn't uniform at all. You know, it wasn't like sort of run by the Brahmins necessarily. It depended on the different, but obviously that, I think, did develop over time, as far as I can make out, because but I think the point that Mary was making is also really interesting about how, you know, just human ignorance and human, you know, incapacity to hold something as profound and subtle as you know, the thinking that came out of India over time, you know, is also inevitably going to happen somehow.
You mean get corrupted?
Yeah, get corrupted and lose its kind of vital force, you know, which it obviously had at one time in an extraordinary way. Yeah, because
I guess
human beings are human beings, you know.
So I guess I'm curious, just in relation to that, how you guys see India now, because something that you both have referred to is, because you both obviously really deeply, you know, there's things in your, you know, that you honor about Indian culture, and, you know, your engagement with elders and things like that. So I'm curious how you relate to that past, given what you just said, Suruchi, how much the Dalit movement is now having to really assert itself, right, to right things. I don't know, just how you see all that, how you relate to the past and the present, with your love of India and appreciation of it.
Well, the future is Dalit, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Even just sheer numbers.
What would that mean, though, in terms of
what would it mean?
Yeah, what would that mean?
Yeah, it's because actually a small percentage of people can actually control everything, you know. So there's such tremendous wealth with the Banyas and the Brahmins. So that has too many centuries of that is there, you know. So, but now because of education and because of the reservations that we have in education, these people are managing to break through everywhere. Maybe in the next 400-500 years, I don't know. I think it'll look quite good.
I think there's a fractal nature of control exerted by a small group. Because I also wanted to bring up something around the city of London and the financial structures that are enabled by, I think, the law that runs in the city of London, and therefore allows shell companies and tax havens, and how globally that gets used, and also keeps a certain set of people rich.
Yes.
In control of the ropes of the world.
Yes,
Too
definitely.
True. Yeah.
And I think that fractal nature also replicates here, where there is a small group of people who continue to be in power in various places. These are male Hindu Brahmin.
Right.
Actually, if you look at it, and I belong to that, so I know that there is a. I mean, for me, for the longest time, caste did not exist because I was the privileged one. So, like, okay, I'm blind to caste because it's working for me, just as gender, right? Like, I'm blind to so many of these things because
he's like the WASP equivalent, you know.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
So, so I'm saying that when I say fractal nature, I'm saying that everywhere I see similar structures, and everywhere the intent is for the larger groups to challenge power that is held by that small
Yeah.
group. My centrist skepticism comes from a few things. I think one is the assumption that if power shifts from there to the people, everybody will be better off, which might not be true. We assume that's true, but that may not be true because the people who are quote unquote ruling classes or people who've been in power have a culture of being in power, have learned a lot over time, and they have almost specialized a certain niche of being in power. And this can, of course, I can completely be slammed for justifying power, but I'm trying to talk from a very neutral, at least from very neutral lens of saying that if we stop valuing it in this way and actually share power and look at people in power as a specialization of people doing certain tasks for the society as valuable. There's something there in terms of a shift, which I have more faith in. Because just replacing upper caste Brahmins with Dalits and certainly hoping our problems will disappear, I don't think is going to happen. It'll create a satisfaction that my identity is there now, but also I feel it's a setup for a huge disappointment that my own people have failed me. It's almost like people, when British left and Indians came in, people thought things may be different, and yet a lot of things continue. Just replaced one with the other. So there is something deeper here, which to me has to do with the fundamental structure of power as we have designed our societies, and that needs disruption. So to me, the disruption has to be very archetypical at that depth. And it may then manifest in a lot of ways. It may manifest in the equation between India and UK changing. It may manifest in the equation of Dalit Brahmins changing. But the place to solve it to me doesn't seem to be at the surface. It seems to be going deep into the structure and then seeing that this is happening everywhere. And if we disrupt it, then the manifestations will start healing. Something like that's my position there.
But coming back to the question, which was the
history and how do you look at history?
One believes in the cyclical nature of things. You know, somehow the great civilizations and the glory of the past, and then the hubris, and then somehow just the natural order of things for it to just deteriorate and not able to capitalize on that gain after a certain point. You know, somehow every ancient civilization seems to have broken up, and and it's a mess now. In fact, those civilizations which were amazing, maybe I mean, it's my dream to go back into the past of India and see what it was like. You know, can you imagine?
We joke that she's come from the past. The music she listens, she 18, 7, come from
way before, way.
8, 9.
And then I wonder, but then like countries like America or like all the Scandinavian countries or wherever, like how much more will they sort of move ahead before the same thing starts happening over there? But somehow I can't even imagine it. I can't even imagine that disintegration or the complete rotting of culture and fabric and everything just breaking down ever happening in these countries, which is what happened in India. But then I'm like, in India, because then we had the Mughals and we had the British, so maybe everything just got destroyed. And is there any such place left where you could actually see what would have happened without that sort of intrusion? But like a great culture to begin with, I don't know whether that's there anyway. So I just wonder. I wonder if then some of these Western countries will also go through that.
Oh, I think so. I think they are, to be honest. I think we don't always see it, but I mean, for America, for example, I think it's going to have serious problems. I think it is rotting. Just to speak about that, even if we think of it as, it's very strong economically, but it really suffers from what you said, Abhi, about small group holding. I mean, really extreme now. And they have global power. So there's that problem. But the gap between that and everybody else is getting huge. And just like, we often don't hear about it, but like COVID, I mean, there are millions of people who are unemployed in America. And apparently I heard from a friend on the West Coast, it's like, tent cities of homeless people that weren't there. So it's, you know, we don't hear about that so much. But I think that the even the system of democracy, which was so carefully put together, and, you know, America has a constitution, Britain doesn't even have a constitution to work it all out. It's getting eaten from the inside by, right now, by the GOP. Even its own institutions that could be seen as being really, you know, the West, the best of the West, they're getting destroyed because of greed and power, really. So I think the West will go through these. I don't know if that you meant, but I think definitely will. And I think what you described about England, Avi, about this unbelievable financial control it has, which is very rotten at its core and has been forever. I mean, it's really like we provide the biggest, you know, tax havens, you know, laundering place for the Russian billionaires. I mean, it's like everything corrupt financially happens in Britain. I mean, it's unbelievable, but it keeps the city going. And I think, you know, more and more people are becoming awake to that. And I think, I mean, I don't know, but, or none of us know, but I think there's a sensibility which used to be very fringe and very on the outside, that's slowly making its way into more, particularly millennial populations. But that is a sensibility that just is closer to, it's not so ideological, it doesn't seem to me, but has a sensibility for what really does not make sense and what is kind of immoral in the bigger sense. I don't mean a Christian sense or anything, but just a deeply, you know, something's just wrong in unjust sense. So I feel like, and it's interesting that these movements are happening, like the Dalit movement, which comes from as a resistance to, you know, and in the West, there's movements now against this oligarchy, elite billionaire class. It's getting less and less, you know, they're having to defend themselves more and more, even to Congress. And, you know, there is a movement against, and I think, a little general, but I feel within that there's an intelligence or a kind of sensibility that is emerging, and which is possibly ties in with what you said too, Abhi, about the conference, that is starting to recognize the West does not have it. You know, it's not the epitome of success, you know, in all ways. So that's a good thing if that's happening. It's getting shaken.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I'm thinking about what you were saying, Abhi, about, you know, your ideas about centrism and in relationship to what we're talking about, because I mean, I don't really have enough of a sense of the Dalit movement in India and what it kind of represents in a way, or how people are thinking. Is it just a sort of response of anger, or is there, you know, are the kind of other ways of thinking that are being kind of promoted, or is it just a response? I mean, I just don't know enough about it. But I mean, obviously there's a big culture war in the West between the left and the right, and the left has got into a lot of trouble of late because of so-called, you know, wokeism, which is a real thing, you know, which I'm sure you know about. So that is all very much true. However, I think Mary's right in saying that there is, which it's interesting what, the Integral Conference is an interesting, perhaps an example of that, but certainly I would say things like climate change, for one thing, and, you know, issues of, you know, like, I mean, at the moment, my mind's a little bit on this whole thing about the statues, you know, because in England at the moment, there's been this big discussion about statues, you know, because statues are very, especially in London, but also elsewhere around the country, are that, you know, there's this sort of, they all promote sort of war heroes, you know, and most of them a lot of them are colonialists of various kinds who've done absolutely horrendous things around the world. So, you know, there's a big movement now. In fact, they actually pulled down, so the progressives pulled down a statue in Bristol of a famous slave trader who was very involved with the whole foundation of the city, actually. so to me, that's kind of expressive of some kind of, it actually goes quite deep, I think. You know, it's a kind of, it's an expression of something of the sort of grosser aspects of, just like what you were talking about, the City of London. I mean, there's another good example, these kind of grosser aspects of power and privilege, you know, that there is a kind of, there's a kind of gut response emerging to, but also it's not just a kind of anger. I think there is also there is a response to there's a search for a more holistic way of looking at the world, and climate change is obviously a big, you know, the climate change movement is a big expression of that. So for me in the West right now, the progressive movement is in a kind of interesting place because there are a lot of, there's some fantastic thinking going on, you know, which we're very good at in the West, as you know. The sort of cognitive apparatus is alive and kicking, and, you know, we're really good at that stuff. And some great thinkers are coming out, but which is all really good, and lots of, you know, alternative maps and theories and structures and systems, you know, et cetera, which is all really good stuff. So, I mean, I think that is all really important. I think the thing I'm kind of conscious of is that that mostly in the West, though, the spiritual dimension is something that we don't really know how to deal with, particularly in Europe. In America, you know, spirituality generally is more acceptable because, you know, various forms of Christianity have actually been kept alive in the US. But in Europe, you know, postmodernism has had a massive impact, you know, I mean, so it's hard for us, I think, for the progressive movement the progressive movement's very wary of spirituality, you know, they're very wary of its connection to totalitarianism. And so there's a lot of kind of treading very, very carefully in that area. And I think it's something that, I mean, I know this is sort of really talking about the West now, so because there's a lot that I don't know about that's happening with these movements, how the Dalit movement relates to the progressive movement in India, you know, et cetera. Those kind of questions I just don't know the answers to. But certainly some of the issues here, I think, are, for me, to do with, you know, how do we articulate something deeper that's, okay, holistic is one thing. I mean, a lot of people looking to indigenous ways of looking at the world, which is obviously very much relates to climate change, the earth, et cetera, really, that's all. But in terms of, you know, deep spirituality, a deeper spiritual context, I think that is something that we still haven't really, we don't know really how to go there yet, is my observation. Anyway, that's rather a lot of different things I'm saying.
Well, I'm just thinking out of that, Steve. I'm just trying to think about being Suruchi. If there's a question in that, because it seems to us, and we might be wrong, that India has obviously got, like you described, these issues as well, and from the billionaire class to the Dalit movement. But does seem to us anyway, that you have a living spiritual heritage that could, or seems to be, even from the work you guys are doing, informing more contemporary, like how do you respond to all this, right? So that's my question, I guess, to you guys, because I think we have, like Steve said, more difficulty because we don't have that so easily, in our cultural psyches.
I think just because a few points, not really connected to this, but just what came up while the two of you were speaking. One was, I definitely really believe in that saying from the Bible, that the sins of the father will be visited on the children. And it's more and more as I live and see things, I really believe in that too. The wheel of karma, you just can't.
Yeah.
And you're saying, Suruchi, in general, you're not just talking about India, you're talking about in the world. Right.
Yeah, I guess in the world, I don't know much about the world, but now when I see what's happening with the Dalits, I see what's happening with women and so-called
Right.
innocent bystanders, standards being shut down, or being accused when they didn't do. Oh, I didn't do so much. It was my grandparents who did it. But you know what? Sorry, like, you can't escape it. You can't escape it. So that was something that definitely came up for me when we were speaking about all this. So maybe the West. No, I hate this whole term, the West. Just like what certain people from there did to certain people around the world, the indigenous people. It's gonna come and bite them where it hurts. So that I think that was one point. The other point was that all this, a lot of one would never imagine the rise of such a strong the right as opposed to the left in India, because India was generally seen as a soft leftist country. Nehru and then the Congress and always, even though behind closed doors they were doing all kinds of things, but generally we were seen as that. And in response to that, the simmering Hindu and the hatred for colonial, for the left, the way it came and overthrew that, but it took about 50 years to do that. They're in power now, and I don't think they're going away anytime soon. So one big change I see with them is that at least you would never have imagined India to have electricity everywhere, good roads, less corruption. But that's one thing the right has managed to do. Like Modi really is trying to bring that about. Because otherwise when you look at India and you see it's such a mess, but things are changing. Things are changing. And maybe the ancient India, which was known for its roads, its small resting houses, and whatever we had then, there is a chance that things could get better here. Even though it doesn't look like that at all. What we're seeing, it's so vast and rotten and all those things. But maybe that's also something that came up. And also all these factions that we have in India, they're bitterly fighting.
The what?
So much
The what?
Oh, hate.
Factions. Like you have them, like you said, it's divided. It's so divided. And so is India. And
interesting.
It's so bitter, the fighting, and just the inability to listen and refusal to listen and stick to your point of view, that people have just given up. And I think that's why Abhishek really sticks to his center stand, that the only way forward is dialogue. Even if it's you just coming and spewing hate at the other person spewing hate, but sit in the same space and do it. And you only have your turn, and then you have your turn, and then finally, eventually, you're going to get tired, and maybe there's going to be, And another very small point was, like something like people from, I don't know whether it's politically correct to call them Aborigines. I don't know. What are they called, honestly? The natives, First People, and other places. Just insisting that people learn how to pronounce their names. It seems very small, but actually it shows you that the wheel is turning, like things are changing. Earlier you just be like, oh, these Westerners, they can't pronounce our names, or poor things. So you can just call me Sue. And generations of people did it in the West, because I remember when I was living in the US, and like, oh my God, I can't pronounce that name. Can't you do something simple? Can't you tell me something simple? And we'd feel attacked, or we'd be like, okay, just call me Sue,
Yeah.
So everybody's just called Sam or Sue, or
Right.
But now people are just saying, no, just pronounce my name. It's okay, learn to pronounce my name. So that was just some of the points that came up for me.
Interesting.
Very.
Gosh.
Sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Abhi.
Go ahead, Abhi. Yeah.
Trying to define Indic centricism.
Indic centrism. That's interesting.
Centricism.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Centrism as like Rumi said that beyond the right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. and I'll meet you there.
Mhm.
There is a field where binaries dissolve, and there is oneness,
Mhm.
shared humanity.
Mhm.
It's forced language in some ways. It is a space of undivided attention, a certain connection to
Mhm.
the spirit, and it's dynamic, it's not static.
Mhm.
So center not as an average of left and right, but really instead of looking at it like a center left and right, to make the space three-dimensional,
Mhm.
and center as a movement in these two directions, zooming
Mhm.
out and finding the deeper essence both. So you're moving from a two-dimensional to a three-dimensional space itself. So center is breaking the frame that
Mhm.
has got us trapped, saying, okay, choose left versus right. Center is coming and breaking that frame
Mhm.
to expand the field itself and
Mhm.
invite people into that field. And then centrism also is not trying to solve everything at once. I think I feel one of the places where we are stuck is we're trying to solve for everything at the same time, for all
Mhm.
times to come. Whereas I think the relevant question is what's in the center right now. Like
Mhm.
say, in four of us, the centrist approach would say, okay, what's at the center?
Mhm.
Let's
Mhm.
address what's at the center. Let's not try to address something that is then and there.
Mhm.
Let's attend to what is here and now.
Mhm.
Because the center is here and now. The center is not then and
Mhm.
there. It's also post-ideological because you're trying to respond not from an ideology, because that's a repetitive pattern that's programmed in your mind. You're free to respond from what's in the moment.
Mhm.
And therefore, dialogue and a quest for truth, but the quest for the dynamic truth, which on our next call may also change
Mhm.
because it's so dynamic, right? And so I think what I'm trying to do is to reclaim the center,
Mhm.
but not reclaim it as a static center or as what is, I mean, close to radical centrism, but beyond that to say grounded in an Indic cultural memory of oneness and of seeing everybody as manifestations of one spirit. So that's what we're trying to do. I've been doing rooms on Clubhouse. I'm doing one today also called the Indic Centricism.
That's great. Oh,
Yeah. And we're realizing there is limits to language there because language itself can only carry us this far. So you have to rely on resonance, you have to go beyond what. Yeah. So I think that is one thing that I'm kind of attempting very sincerely, as sincerely as I can, because I feel there is something there. Um, and the other thing that was coming to me was also the rate of change is increasing. I read something where the rate of paradigm shift, they were saying, doubles every 10 years now. What happens happens in a year, a decade later will happen in 6 months, and a decade later will happen in 3 months, and 60 years later will happen in 11 days. So it seems like what happens in a year now, when Ananya is 60 years later, will happen in like 11 days or something. That's the rate. And I think it just does not mean technology. I think the way I'm reading it is deeper paradigms, ways of thinking. So things are melting, and we are in that accelerating meltingness. And I feel it is the collective interior, if I can say, where the collective exterior is becoming artificial intelligence and singularity. So as collective exterior goes, the collective interior will also deepen, right? It cannot stay as static. I was telling Sur that when women must have invented fire, it must have created great psychological safety inside also. The invention of fire is in the lower right quadrant perhaps as fire, but then it does something to us psychologically. Now we have fire. So just as AI is getting invented in the outer collective exterior, I think collective interior, the singularity is this churning that is happening. A churning of identities and the birthing of this connecting tissue that I keep talking about, which is people like us, right, who are at the edge of a cultural singularity, not in a, how do I say, not a cultural singularity, but a cultural connectedness.
Yes.
A culturally sensing organ. And the invitation there, which I also have made earlier to others from other countries, is what is it to be you, and what is your role in the world? What is your history? What is your song? Like this, particularly with friends from Netherlands, I feel like Netherlands, I feel some connection to them. I feel Netherlands has something to give to the world. So I asked them, say, okay, what is your experience and history bring to the world? What's your gift to the world? So it's like I would ask you, saying, what is UK's gift to the world, or what is India's gift to the world? So while we're doing, again, one third for me, one third is my gift, India's gift, and then maybe one third is kind of the gift between cultures, and 1/3 is the global culture gift, maybe. So I'm saying that.
Abhi,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt you, but you're going very fast through a lot of things, and I just want to slow you down a bit here.
Okay.
No, it's great. It's great.
It's
But
really,
let's-
really good. So can I just go back to the Indic centrism for a minute? So one of the things that you spoke about when we spoke a little while, a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago now. Okay, just talking about the center, right, for a minute. So so one of the things that I think you were speaking about is, and I think that this is very important in terms of if centrism is going to mean something other than simply, something between left and right, as it were, or between binaries, right? But if the center is going to have sort of this dimension you were talking about, sort of, right, then the individuals involved need to have a center.
Yes, absolutely.
So that was something that you were speaking about in terms of India. That was something that was quite a priority because of the level of fragmentation, which you put down to a number of different things, right? That you feel in a way needed to get integrated in the Indian psyche, if you like, right? So I think that's one thing, because I think that's really, I think really important, because, for the centrism to mean what I think you mean it to mean, which I think is a fascinating concept. And I think it obviously would need to have, there's work to be done, right? I mean, in the context of that kind of integration of the fragmentation that you were referring to, right? So I'm talking about in India now, but then I'm wondering, okay, so also another question. So
well, maybe Steve, let's just start with that. Yeah, unless it's
Okay.
connected, but because that's quite a lot.
Yes, okay. We can start with that. Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Because I'm curious about that. Yeah.
I can respond to that, Steve. So one thing that is definitely coming up is that to build a centrist movement, or to everybody has to be in touch with their center. And again, not a static center, like you definitely need some anchoring, but also the dynamic center of where your attention or where you are right now.
Yeah, I
Those
think
two in
that the center we're talking about is by its nature dynamic, I think.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, it's by its nature a dynamic state.
Yes. Absolutely. And like I said, it's post language, because each time you're trying to capture it in language or an ism, you're anyways trying to fossilize it, right? And there's that paradox that one has to hold. I think one thing that was interesting that came up both with Raghu and interestingly with a friend who's working on blockchain and holochain technology, similar pattern I saw both places. So what comes out is what we call interface rules. And what the blockchain friend was calling it mimetic bridges, memes as in mimetic bridges. So really, I mean, my own integration of my identity can be a process that's ongoing and forever. It's not a prerequisite to engage with Suruchi, nor is it my business what's Suruchi's process of integration. What we need to negotiate is our interface rules. So it is not in my domain to deal with what is Suruchi's inner journey. It's her journey, and in our V space, we're trying to find the center, and we're negotiating only the interface rules.
Yeah.
We're not negotiating who am I, who are you, you're free to be you, I'm free to be me. But in the spaces where we are negotiating, we need to negotiate the interface rules. So what Raghu was earlier saying was that in India, communities had their own practices, ways, and there's not like don't judge the other's practice, because the other is not an enemy. Trust them with their practice only where there is an interface, whether it's a marketplace or a temple. That's the rules that need to be negotiated. And to me, that's an important insight, because then what you're trying to quote unquote fix is not the whole world. What you're trying to solve for is interface rules in the here and now. And that reduces the size of the problem, I feel, considerably. And yeah, I think I'll leave it that. I mean, that's a big one to unpack, but I think I'll just.
But what happens when you don't agree?
You have to negotiate through dialogue, right? And you try and use a non-violent approach. till it reaches a point where our disagreement has no choice except violence, which is what Mahabharata kind of captures, I think. It's like it's the emergency manual. So we have a scripture called the Mahabharata, which is a war story.
Yeah.
And the way I make sense of that war story is it's an emergency manual. It's like in a flight, when you go in a flight, you see that card which says, what should you do when the plane is about to crash? You never do it. It's not for normal times. It's for emergency. That's why that's placed. What you're told is not what to do in normal times. You're told what to do when it gets really tough. And to me, our scripture, Mahabharata, which comes from an oral tradition, is not, it's a manual for emergency.
I'd never heard it described that way before.
It's an emergency manual. It's not a peacetime manual. It's a wartime manual. So if we don't agree, I have to go back to Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata and read it and respond from the warrior skills and say, this is not okay. Right? And then we, as good audience.
Okay, Abhi, you are going a little too fast for me here. I've got to slow you down a bit. So, I mean, just coming back to this thing about the center. Okay, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm not quite sure how it relates to this kind of collective dimension that you were talking about the fragmentation in the Indian psyche that has sort of various, you talked about what is the right relationship to the past. You talked about, feeling the guilt. I think you said something about the guilt towards your ancestors. I mean, there were various issues.
That's a lot of things, Steve. We're introducing now.
No, okay. So
he can. I have something there.
Okay.
The reason I'm bringing this in is because I'm trying to understand what is the relationship between these kind of collective dimensions that have resulted in a certain degree of fragmentation. And at the same time, you're talking about centrism in terms of, how we interact, or, we interact in this context or in that context. We're individuals, but we also interact. But I'm talking really about this more sort of collective, because, in terms of finding a center, it seems like, there is inevitably going to be a need to deal with a certain, if there is such a thing, which it seemed to be from what you were talking about before, a kind of collective dimension of fragmentation that has certain kind of reasons, if you like, perhaps causes.
Yeah, so I don't know if I get your question correctly, Steve. I'll just repeat it to just make sure. So you're saying that this still doesn't answer the fact that there are fragmentations in the Indian collective psyche and in the society. What are we going to do about that? Is that?
Well, it's just that. Okay, it's just that we were talking about the center, right? We were saying, okay, for centrism to have a meaning, everybody needs to have a sense of a center, right? And obviously, it's very hard to have a sense of a center if you're very fragmented.
Right, internally.
Yes, internally, right? So that's what I'm referring to. Because I'm just responding to something you brought up in our first conversation that actually I thought was very interesting, because I know that. Let me just finish.
Okay.
So, like, for example, I've had conversations with young Indians myself, where I've been, I have been very struck by them having a lot of almost like a emotional difficulty in articulating where they are, kind of in their own psyche in a certain way. I think because of these kind of all of these very powerful influences, the West, obviously is a huge one, maybe some of the other things that you've mentioned. So I just think that seems like really important to me. That's kind of what I'm referring to in terms of this thing of finding a center.
Are you asking Abhi and Suruchi what that would be in India? Is that what you're asking? What they mean by a center?
Well, I'm saying, because I'm just trying to
still not clear what the question is.
Okay, I'm trying to get at Okay, the bigger context is centrism, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean? So I think then I was saying, well, yeah, for centrism to have a real multidimensional, deeper meaning, we need to have a center, right? So it seemed to me that one of the issues, at least in India, I think the issues are probably different in the West, but for different reasons. But I think in India, you had described to me, and this is what I'm trying to just get clear about, in terms of finding that center, that there was certain fragmentation that needed to be kind of like thought about, reflected on, or whatever. So is that correct?
Yeah, there are several fragmentations, definitely, like any other society. So yeah, they do exist. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask, I want to ask something that I think might get to this a little, because when you were both talking about the centric and the Indic, when you spoke about Indic centrism, and you mentioned
Not me,
Rumi.
not me. I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
meeting beyond fragmentation, right? You mentioned, I think you quoted Rumi, right?
Yeah.
So that is almost like the deepest place any being can meet, right? That third space. And
Right.
as you said, it's not fixed, it's not a place, it's not an ideology.
Yeah.
It's existential in a way, it's to do with that, I think, that deepest place where we exist before we're Mary or Suruchi or Avi or Steve, it's pre that. I understood that's what you meant.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So then from the way I would then proceed to understand what you meant by a center, because I think in the West, for very different reasons, we suffer from the same thing. A lot of people have very big ideas, but they actually don't even know themselves. But it's for different reasons than
Right.
India. So to me, I'll just say how I understand that. For me to have a center means I have discovered in a way myself, that place beyond where we all meet. That's the deepest center for me, even individually, right? And then my center has developed through my life, and is still a journey of self-knowledge, with that being my context, if you know what I mean. That deepest place that I was very, to have encountered in a way, to know deeply, which I forget, and all kind of things happen, but that's there. But then my path has been, who am I? Just like you were saying, who are we all as individuals? What's our purpose here? Who am I as an expression of that? That to me is the center. It's like those two come together, the personal and the big, right? Is that kind of what you meant by India too, or not? Or did you mean something different? What is that?
Yeah, I meant close to what you were saying. I was saying that using Ken Wilber's language, we don't need to read center as a stage if we are able to experience center as a state. Not everybody needs to read center stage.
Sure.
Some people will read center stage and full power to that.
Understand.
They've discovered themselves.
Sure.
I think collectively, when we come together, we have the possibility of creating center space, center field, which is independent of where people are, what they're affected, because it's created in the moment, in the here and now.
Right.
And then what I'm proposing is that we deal only with what arises in that space then and there. So for example, if I have a colonial baggage, say with you, Steve, for example, and if it is arising in this space right now, I call it out. But if it is not arising, then it is dead. It doesn't belong here. So it doesn't exist in the center. It's not in the center. Suppose gender becomes salient for any of us, maybe for Sur, or for me, saying that Sur hasn't spoken, for example, then it's in the here and now that I'm resolving that knot. I'm not trying to resolve it for all times, all spaces, all men and women. That attempt itself is, it's worth rejecting. And you just, so the boundary you're setting is very here and now, the boundary of the conversation, boundary of, as
Okay.
it relates to us, as it shows up to us.
Right.
And in doing that, then just coming back to what we said, saying what is the right relationship of the past and even the future is only to the extent that it shows up in the present.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so that's where that's what I'm hoping, that if we're able to tap into that field collectively and sense from there, that what needs to happen will happen through it. Something like that.
And do you feel there's do you think there's a difference east to west, or in what you're speaking about? I mean, do you think it would have the same kind of meaning in a way in east to west? I mean, as far
The
as you
field
can
is the
tell.
field, I feel, right? So the access to the field, I think the field is field, what Krishnamurti was pointing at.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
What I mean, the field is the field. I think beyond our identity lies the field, and I think access to that is independent, is my guess. Definitely, the state access to that is independent of cultures.
Right.
I don't know
Yes.
about the stage access to it, may be more easier for some cultures, but really, we are not even talking stage access. We're
Right.
saying state access.
Mm-hmm.
Which is then accessible to people, right, irrespective of their so-called developmental levels.
Yes, and obviously
then-
different things will emerge in the field
Yes.
according to where you are and who you are. So
Yes.
It's very, yeah, Suruchi.
No.
Sure.
Yeah.
I thought she had something.
anyway, that's good. I think I get a better. That's clearer to me now. What you're saying.
I had one more thing to say, Steve, but maybe Mary can share it.
No, go ahead. It's fine.
I think I loved what Raghu also articulated about the Indian identity. He said that there's a victim identity which is full of guilt and shame.
Right.
We don't want that. There is a very proud identity which is like our past was proud and we are perfect, and that's kind of the ruling party of India. We don't want that.
Right.
There is an apologetic reformist identity which is in envy of the West and wants to reshape India in the image of the West, with some of the people who were immediately after independence in charge of the country were trying to do. So we don't want even that.
Right.
So these three we do not want.
Right.
There's a fourth kind of space which is grounded in an Indianness, is confident but also in touch with shadows, humble, willing to dialogue, willing to live with multiple truths, not interested in dominating others, but equally willing to not be dominated and rooted. So there is a fourth kind of identity or fourth Indianness that I think is the quest to reclaim that. I think that was, I loved the way he put it, because that in some ways answers, in some way, I feel tangential way, it responds to the what about the fragmentations in the society and what about issues.
Right.
I'll just
good.
come.
Good. Very good. Yeah. Very good. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Raghu is like, I think we spoke about him last time also.
Yes,
Who is he? Who is he?
Raghu is the guy who's, him and Sashi. Sashi's his wife. They
Raghu. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm starting a course. I finished his Mahabharata immersion.
Oh, you did that. Oh, you did that.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Oh my God, it was incredible.
Right, really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yes.
I mean, I can't imagine as an Indian to go through something like that. That must have been really
Yeah,
fascinating.
can you imagine? Yeah, the archetypes just ring so true for us. And,
Yeah, it must be very powerful, I can imagine.
very powerful, very powerful. And you have like this guru, right? It's literally like the sage. You're just waiting for him to say something, and then like these pearls of wisdom. Anytime he speaks, it just yes, he just look at you and look right through you, and just say, he needs to speak a sentence or two, and he's just covered it all. So he's starting another course called Saptaswara, which is 7 words. He's picked 7 words from Indian philosophy, and each session he's going to deep dive into one word.
Fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
Very, very. Are you going to do that, Suruchi?
Yeah, it's every Saturday morning, 7 a.m. to 11 a.m.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Wow.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
So it's interesting how this whole Indic thing is also growing.
Oh, it sounds great.
Yeah. I think you guys would also really enjoy it, but you probably know of his work, and
Yeah, we do, but you know, actually, we in fact, I met Sashi, but just for a very short time, had coffee with her somewhere. But we had intended to meet them and visit Ritambara, yeah. But
COVID came.
COVID, yeah, made it. We couldn't make it, so it never happened. So, still looking forward to that.
You were going to go to Ritambara?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'll share the recordings. Don't worry. It's 6 hours of him talking about all this. 5-6 hours. It's a good, solid piece. Yeah.
Wow.
Great.
Anyway, that's fascinating, and I'm curious. I'm just thinking about, you know, what it means from our context, you know, here, and that's something I'm just, you know, reflecting about as we're talking about this.
Well, I think that I just want to say that I mean, it feels actually quite full, but what you were last describing about identities for India, Abhishek, the last one that Raghu, you know, kind of spoke about, to me is what I have often felt is India's gift in a way to the world. And that sounds all very big and lofty, but I feel there's something in that, which is why I've always been, you know, had this connection to India, to Indian thinking, because it contains, there's so much room in that, right, for diversity particularly. And I somehow connect more to that, and there might be, I might have misunderstood something else. I understand the meme bridges. They feel very appropriate for the West, for Western thinking, because we think in terms of discrete wholes, you know, discrete parts or whatever. And they're generally, as we're saying, quite rivalrous. But meme bridges, you know, spanning feels really important, but it feels, and maybe they can coexist actually, a little bit different to the last identity and kind of means of approaching life in a way that Raghu was outlining, which felt a little bit more, in a way that felt more coming from this big third space, which holds a lot of diversity that can speak to each other and dialogue. But I guess in sort of life as it is, we don't relate like that often. So therefore the meme bridges are quite good, right? It's where, you know, that to me is more the emergency technology. Because even when you were both speaking, Suruchi, you said, what happens if we disagree? At times, I can see we need to actually just compromise. We may need to build a bridge that then takes us somewhere to a third place or whatever. Or there's this other possibility that can happen where there's a field where both of those positions get metamorphosed into something other that we're both part of. I mean, there's lots of different possibilities, really. But yeah, I guess I'm just reflecting on what you're saying, really. But I feel like that fourth one that you said about India, the sort of deepest thinking of India that India holds, has a lot for it, not just for India, but also as a kind of, as a not as a model to adopt, but as a kind of pointing to another possibility that I think the West doesn't actually have. No, I don't think we do.
No, I think that's right. I don't think we do either. And I think I mean, I think that would be a great thing to talk about maybe in another time,
one. Yeah.
in another conversations, like how, because actually I do think that's what we need, you know. I mean, I think obviously, you know, meme bridges and all that is good, but I think what we're talking about here is really something deeper, and what we really need to transform society, you know. Really, I think this is what we need, and I think it's beautiful, because there's no ideologies involved, and that's the beauty of it. It's so therefore everybody's included, nobody's left out. And you know, and this is something that was understood, it has been understood in India probably as nowhere else, as so deeply, this thing of everybody's included. You know, it's a beautiful thing, and I think it's what the world is craving for, but we don't know really how to get there. So I think it will be great to just speak more about that in more depth, because I think it's just a really, you know, I get it. I mean, I think for Mary and I, you know, that is sort of what, you know, what makes life worth living really in a certain way is that possibility, you know, is that what that means, you know, it means so much. And it's a deeply creative field. I mean, that's the beauty of it as well. So there's so much potential, so much possibility. All possibilities are in that field, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just, you know, I can be an atheist and still do a little puja every day or go to the temple, and that's totally Indians just understand it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no,
Yeah.
you know, like, oh, this is not scientific. How can, like, it's just maybe, okay, theek hai. So you know, they just get it.
Right. Exactly.
That's very interesting, though, Suruchi. It's almost like it's intangible, but that's very interesting because it's really real too, right?
Yes.
It points to a different kind of, just a different consciousness in a way, you know, and I feel that that's alive in India, even if there's all this fragmentation, which I totally get, and, you know, quite extreme at times, but that's there too, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and it's a different consciousness, and yet at the same time, it's deeply human. It's deeply human, actually. It's just that it actually manifests in India in a very real way, but it's a deeply human thing, actually, because it's really just a kind of allowing for everything to be what it is. I mean, it's not really anything more than that, in a sense, right?
That's what I thought. I thought that was just an example of all the heavy and complex things Abhishek was saying. I just felt that was like my little example.
That's why we need all of us.
Thank you for that. That's why we need you. Yes, very good. Very good. Very good.
I'm just wondering if that's
Yeah, I mean, I probably should. I've got actually some building going on here, and they need to kind of. I've told them I'm going to be on the phone for an hour and a half, so please don't make a racket, you know. But I think I'm probably going to have to let them kind of make a lot of noise now.
Yeah, I just sort of wonder if this is a good spot to wind up, but then make our next one not too far ahead, so we can excuse me, the thread going. Yeah.
I was thinking maybe we could just check out with the sentence or something if that comes naturally. Maybe we mull over this a bit and set up something next week or the week after.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be good.
I'm left with the energy of the conversation and the space to express some of my ideas. So
you what?
I'm happy with the energy of the conversation and a space to share some of my ideas. So
fabulous.
Feeling satisfied by that. Thank you.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate these conversations a lot. They mean a lot to me. Thank you. So, shall we?
No, Suruchi's going to say it.
Sorry?
No, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
No,
go
Steve,
ahead.
if you want to check out and leave, he needs
to.
I
was just going to. Go ahead. I was just going to.
Go ahead.
Today.
I was just going to check out with that. I just feel really very nice. I'm left with a very good feeling, especially about you, Steve and Mary, and a sense of gratitude. You know, for just doing this. It just feels good.
Great.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about you, Mary?
Yeah, no, I feel the same. I feel I really love it. I love the diversity of us, but I feel we're meeting it. There is a field that we're And it's fascinating because we're sort of, you know, bringing different things to that field, to this field that enriches it. So I feel it's very alive, and I really appreciate it too. So I'm glad we're doing it. Yeah.